Sam, are you with us?
I am. Let me get my video going. Yeah, I'm here.
Great, thank you. So I do not want to mangle your name, but Druge, am I pronouncing it right? Please correct me.
Rhymes with hoagie.
Hoagie.
Yeah,
So drogi, would that
got
be
it.
correct?
You are good.
Awesome. No, I'm stumbling over my own tongue. So
No one gets it right, so I answer it anyway.
awesome. So let me get you introduced here. So Sam Drogi grew up in Hyattsville, Maryland, received an undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland and a master at the State University of New York in Syracuse. Most of his career has been spent at the USGS Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, Pax River for guys who like space. And he has conducted the North American Breeding Bird Survey Program, developed the North American Amphibian Monitoring Program, the BioBlitz Cricket Crawl, and Frog Watch USA programs, and works on the design and evaluation of monitoring programs. Currently, his team is running an inventory and a monitoring program for native bees, developing tools and technique manuals along with online identification guides for North American bees at www.discoverlife.org, reviving the North American Bird Phenology Program, and producing public domain high resolution photographs of bees, insects, and flowers at USGBIML. Sam is going to give us a talk today on something I'm very interested in and have just heard about, is the chestnut bee. So without any other further ado, take it away, Sam.
Thank you. I have to say that this has been a really fun exercise on my part to really dive deep into chestnut biology, chestnut obligate insect species, conservation, and just natural history in general. I mean, that's why I got into the business. So it's fun to do that. I'm going to share my screen now and get into a PowerPoint talk. And more will be explained if I can find my PowerPoint. Gosh, where? Oh, nope, there it is. Thank goodness. All right, don't look. I have to go to the beginning. Should have had this set up, but I did not. Working on it at the very last minute. And now if I hit that, okay. Am I good? Are we seeing the title screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about chestnut and the chestnut bee in particular, something that we recently kind of put all the pieces together. But I'm also going to bring up a lot about chinkapins, and you'll see how that plays here. First, we need to talk about bees, just to get people a little bit up to speed. I give talks about this. It's like trying to give a talk about plants in 2 slides. You know, what is a plant? Would be the example. There are a lot of bees, and they do lots of things. What they don't do is anything that a honeybee does. Honeybees are introduced. We know about them, but anything that you can throw out there about honeybees, that's not happening in our native bees. Most of our native bees are solitary nesters, a lot of complicated interrelationships with our regional plants, no surprise there. But just to iterate, no hives, no multi-year queens, no waxy comb, no honey, no stings with barbs, no allergic reactions to stings, and a long list. So this is a bad model when thinking about bees and their relationships with chestnut, which they grew up with evolutionarily, and bees in general. So a couple more slides on that. So in North America, we have about 4,000 species of native bees. We're still figuring out what they are. There's a bunch of species that are new to science that hasn't been described. I just got an email back from someone that I sent a bee that I could not identify from the research center here from last fall. And he said, doesn't fit anything, probably a new species. And, you know, that's in Maryland, right? So there's a lot. This just shows how little we know that we're finding new species. When's the last time you heard about a new bird from Maryland, for example? California, about 2,000, Texas, about 1,000. Most of our biodiversity of bees, west deserts, think in that way. East of the Mississippi, about 800. New England, 450, maybe. I forget, there was an estimate maybe of 440, 460. I'm not sure. I see Michael Veet on this email, on this list of participants. He would know. Spit out some numbers into the chat box there, please. In contrast, the UK, much about the same size probably as New England, only 250 species. We won't go into the differences, but clearly we're better than New England. I mean, than the United Kingdom. So we are going to talk about a bee that's very specialized today, only on chestnut, or actually Castanea. And so that fits in with a larger picture of what's going on in North America in terms of bee specialization. Again, an evolving process. We're learning more and more about who is and isn't specialized in both directions. Thought it was specialized, turns out maybe not so much. Didn't know much about it, turns out it's highly specialized. If we don't know the names, we clearly don't know an awful lot about natural history of a lot of these species. Patterns, though, do exist. Most of the bee specialization that occurs in North America is going to be with perennials and shrubs. And that makes sense because if you're going to specialize on something, you have to have a predictable source of pollen, because that's what they specialize on. And so perennials and shrubs make a whole lot of sense. There's not many annuals involved, and there are no trees until we figured out this chestnut one other than black willow. And really, it's a willow specialization on the willow clade, and most of the willows are shrubby-esque rather than tree-esque. Why didn't that jump to the next thing there? I don't know. It did by itself. So we have a lot of different host taxa involved. So if we look at the plant families, which is generally where things are specializing, but so it's a sliding scale, right? Every bee, honeybees included, have their preferences. And so different bee groups are partitioning out the plant space, plant pollen space in different ways. And so even bees that are generalists, I have to be gathering pollen from lots of different species, have preferences into what they gather. So when we slide that slider down further and further, you get down to individual species, but more commonly you're in the genus to family level, where we're only doing Asteraceae pollen, but we are maybe only doing Helianthus. So sunflowers are a good plant that everyone should be planting a lot more, particularly the perennial sunflowers. Not to get into that, got to stay focused here. Okay, so lots of different plant genera, about 250 different plant genera. Got that from a talk, and Jared Fowler's work there in Massachusetts is something that I'm going to point out in the next slide. So you should be ready to write something down, or at least write down his name. It's easy to search for that. And there's about 7,000 host plant species recorded within the system. Big brackets around that in terms of how well or not well that host species relationship is done. So here's that list that I pointed out, and you can address that, and it actually has places that you can purchase these plants too, either seed or in seed or plants that are linked to the plant and the bee. And most of these plants are relatively common. You will recognize them. They're not super rare, because super rare plants don't have rare bees because of the problem of the source disappearing or being so spaced apart that you're not going to evolve a system like that. A couple of interesting exceptions. So, and just a little conservation message. This is a list that we promote, that people use at the beginning of any notion, keeps automatically going down, any notion of how you would approach what kind of plants do you plant in a region or encourage. Start with the specialist ones, right? Rather than the plants that get everything or easy to grow for a grower. Another entire talk. So in the East, if we look at the specialist bees, so now we're east of Mississippi, there's about 770 species. About 25% of the bees in that area, as far as we know, are specialists, meet our definition. And that also includes, I there must be some automatic turn the page thing going on here. That includes nest parasites. So about 20% of all bee species are parasitizing nests of other bees. And so thus they don't gather their own pollen, but sometimes indirectly they are specialists too, because their host may be a specialist. If you just look at the bees that carry pollen, then about 30% of them are highly specialized. So there's a lot going on. And just think about all the wildflowers you know. A lot of those sizes, shapes, colors are indicators that the plant is targeting certain groups of bees. Mostly it's specialist favorite bees, let's call them. And so different times of day, different times of the year that a plant is blooming, also indication, like it's not just blooming all the time. It has some reasons. Some of that has to do with the plant's needs, its physiology and when it wants to set seeds and that kind of thing. But a lot of it has to do with the bee populations that it's targeting, and the bees, of course, mimic that and are out only during some of these time periods that their favorite plants are blooming. Again, another whole topic. So jumping into chestnuts, here is a map showing a number of different aspects of chestnut distribution based on different authors. And you basically, I just want you to look at this and get a picture that's a relatively restricted range. Like a lot of other plant and tree species have way larger ranges. You know, they're usually bumping up against, say, at least the high plains, rather than something really restricted to that New England Appalachian kind of situation with some fringy elements leaking into the upper Midwest. Okay, so we have that. But on the same hand, we have another set of Castanea, two other species, chinkapin, and is it Allegheny chinkapin? I forget. The eastern chinkapin, which you can see, Castanea pumila and Castanea ozarkensis. Ozarkensis is now either proposed or is a threatened species. And their blooms and everything are very, very similar to, and I would assume their pollination biology is very similar to chestnut, and you know a bit about that. I caught the end of the last talk, very nicely done, and you know something about, which I won't go into details, how things are presenting themselves. So the interesting thing is that in the literature, particularly for chinkapin, there is a leaning towards that they're wind pollinated. I'm thinking they're more insect pollinated for a variety of reasons, but it's not well explored. So you'll see in a couple cases, similar to what we don't know about bees, we don't know about what really is going on in terms of the pollination ecology of the insects using the pollen. Some are straight up predators or just eating the pollen, but many are there for the nectar and pollen and are affecting pollination, but it's a little bit unclear, like how much do they do? Are insects the primary and some wind secondary? Is it not wind at all? All kinds of interesting things to think about there. But I also want you to think about these neglected species. So when I look on the American Chestnut Foundation, they don't mention the red-haired stepchilds. So these two other species are not mentioned really anywhere except as oh look, here's something from a different literature source. These are also impacted by the disease, what is that called? The bad thing that chestnuts get, which is just escaping me what the terminology is, but you know what I mean. The cankers.
Chestnut blight.
Chestnut blight. Okay, the blight whacks them too, and their populations are lower and they grow less large, and they're equally dialed back out of the environment. So, but we need to think about them too. So I think that's something just I'm throwing out there. I'm not asked to nose into your guys' business, but it's something that I think needs a lot of help. And so they're also supporting a lot of these insect groups that we're going to talk about in a second